A young Navy SEAL sat in a Veterans Affairs health clinic, waiting for his physical therapy appointment, when he overheard two nurses at the reception desk. "That old man has been coming here for 3 years," one whispered, glancing toward a weathered veteran hunched in a wheelchair near the window. "Never says much, just sits there with his walker, looking out at nothing." The other nurse shook her head sympathetically. "War does that to people, I guess." The SEAL, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, looked over at the elderly man. His worn jacket hung loose on a thin frame, his hands trembled slightly as they rested on the wheelchair's armrests, and his eyes seemed focused on some distant memory only he could see. Marcus had seen that look before on the faces of operators who'd given everything. Something about the old man's bearing, despite his frailty, commanded respect. If you believe our veterans deserve recognition no matter how much time has passed, type honor in the comments. Marcus had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, participated in classified operations that would never make the news, and trained with some of the most elite warriors in the world. But he'd been taught from day one that the greatest operators were often the quietest ones, the ones who never sought glory, who carried their stories in silence. His grandfather had been like that, a Vietnam vet who'd taken most of his experiences to the grave. Marcus had learned to recognize the signs of someone who'd seen real combat, real sacrifice. This old man had them all: the way he sat with military posture despite his obvious pain, the methodical way he observed everything in the room while appearing to look at nothing, the worn dog tags just barely visible under his collar. Marcus found himself standing, compelled by something he couldn't quite name. He approached slowly, respectfully, not wanting to startle the veteran. "Sir," he said softly, positioning himself where the old man could see him without turning. "I'm Lieutenant Chen, Navy SEAL Team 3. Mind if I sit?" The veteran's eyes, pale blue and sharp despite their surroundings of weathered skin, focused on Marcus with sudden intensity. The old man studied Marcus's face for a long moment, then nodded toward the empty chair beside him. "Free country," he said, his voice rough like gravel, but steady. Marcus sat, noticing the faded unit patches on the veteran's jacket, the kind you couldn't buy in stores. They were authentic, worn by time and weather. "I couldn't help but notice you're a fellow veteran," Marcus said. "What branch?" The old man's lips quirked slightly. "Army. Long time ago. Different world." He paused, then added, 160th SOAR. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. They were legendary, the pilots who flew special operations forces into impossible situations. "You flew?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the interest from his voice. The veteran nodded slowly. "Chinooks, mostly. Some Black Hawks, back when my hands were steadier and my back wasn't held together with titanium." There was no bitterness in his voice, just simple fact. Marcus leaned forward slightly, knowing he was in the presence of someone special, but not yet understanding how special. "Did you have a call sign, sir?" Marcus asked, and the question hung in the air between them. Call signs were sacred in the military, earned through actions, carried with pride. The old man was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he might not answer. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "Foxtrot One." The words were barely above a whisper, but they hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mind raced, connecting dots, pulling up half-remembered briefings and legendary stories told in hushed tones during training. Foxtrot One, the Chinook pilot, the legend. Marcus's mouth went dry. "Sir," he said, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. You're the pilot from Operation Crimson Dawn." The veteran's eyes closed briefly, and Marcus saw his jaw tighten. That was the name they gave it after. The old man, whose name Marcus would learn was Colonel James Harrison, retired, said quietly, "We just called it Tuesday." But Marcus knew the story. Every SEAL did. Every special operator did. 23 years ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan, a reconnaissance team had been compromised, pinned down by overwhelming enemy forces in a narrow valley with no escape route. The terrain was impossible, the enemy fire devastating, the weather deteriorating by the minute. Multiple aircraft had been turned back. The mission had been called off. 10 men were going to die on that mountain, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Except one pilot, Callsign Foxtrot One, had refused to accept that answer. Marcus felt his hands trembling as the pieces fell into place. "You flew in alone," he said. Not a question, but a statement of awe. Through a mountain pass rated impossible in clear weather during a dust storm, with both engines damaged from ground fire, and you held position on a 30-degree slope while they loaded wounded. Colonel Harrison's eyes remained fixed on the window. "Lost my co-pilot on the approach. RPG hit the cockpit. Shrapnel in my back, controls shot to hell. But the bird held together. She always was a tough old girl." His voice caught slightly. "We got them out. All 10. Though I crashed the bird on the way back to base. Been in this chair ever since." The clinical waiting room suddenly felt holy. Marcus understood now why this man sat alone, why the nurses didn't know his story, why he came and went in silence. "Sir," Marcus said, and his voice cracked despite his best efforts to control it. "Do you know what they teach us about you at Coronado? About Foxtrot One?" The colonel shook his head slightly. "I don't imagine they teach anything about an old man who crashed a $40 million aircraft." Marcus actually laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. "Sir, they teach us that the most important mission is getting your people home. That the aircraft, the equipment, the protocols, none of it matters as much as the warriors counting on you. Foxtrot One is the standard. You're the standard." He paused, searching for words adequate to express what he felt. "One of those 10 men you pulled out that day was Captain Richard Morrison. He went on to become an admiral. He personally oversees SEAL training now. He starts every class with your story, with Foxtrot One. Sir, you didn't just save 10 lives that day. You saved everyone they went on to save, everyone they trained, everyone they inspired. Your bloodline runs through the entire Special Operations community." Colonel Harrison's composure finally cracked. Tears welled in his pale blue eyes, and his trembling hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests tightly. "I thought," he said, his voice barely audible. "I thought everyone had forgotten. It's been so long. I come here for my appointments, I go home to my empty house, and I thought maybe it didn't matter anymore." Marcus found himself standing, coming to attention in the middle of that civilian clinic, and rendering the sharpest salute of his life. "Sir, Colonel Harrison, on behalf of every SEAL who's made it home because someone taught them that the mission is bringing everyone back, on behalf of every pilot who's pushed past impossible because they knew it had been done before, on behalf of those 10 warriors and their families, and everyone they touched, thank you. It mattered. It matters. You matter." Around them, the clinic had gone quiet. The nurses stood frozen behind their desk, one with her hand over her mouth. A Marine veteran in the corner had risen to his feet, standing at attention. An Army sergeant, waiting for his appointment, stood as well. They didn't all know the story, but they recognized the moment, the sacred connection between warriors across generations. Colonel Harrison struggled to return the salute from his wheelchair, his hand shaking but held high with pride that had been buried under years of lonely silence. That day marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Marcus made sure his physical therapy appointments aligned with Colonel Harrison's schedule. They'd sit together, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes with Marcus asking questions about flying, about leadership, about what it meant to make impossible choices. The colonel's stories began to flow, memories unlocked by the knowledge that someone cared, that his experiences mattered to the next generation. He talked about his crew, about the men he'd lost, about the ones he'd saved, about the weight of command and the price of courage. Marcus learned that Harrison's wife had passed away 4 years earlier, that his children lived across the country and rarely visited, that he'd been slowly fading into obscurity until that chance meeting. Marcus refused to let that continue. He started bringing other SEALs to meet the colonel, young operators who listened with reverence as Foxtrot One shared wisdom earned in blood and fire. Harrison showed them his old flight logs, his maps, photographs of crews and aircraft and missions that had shaped the modern special operations community. The old veteran's home stopped being so empty. Marcus coordinated visits, sometimes bringing teammates, sometimes coming alone just to sit and talk. Harrison taught him about helicopter operations, about reading terrain and weather, about making life or death decisions in seconds. But more than that, he taught him about carrying the weight of those decisions for decades after, about staying true to your principles when no one is watching, about the quiet dignity of service without recognition. For Marcus, those afternoons became sacred. He realized he wasn't just honoring a legend. He was learning from a living library of hard-won knowledge. Harrison spoke about failed missions, about friends lost, about the burden of survival when others didn't make it home. He taught Marcus that true heroism wasn't about the glory, but about doing what needed to be done, regardless of cost. The nurses at the clinic noticed the change. Colonel Harrison sat straighter, smiled more, his eyes carrying light instead of distance. They watched as this young SEAL transformed a forgotten old man back into the warrior he'd always been underneath. 6 months after their first conversation, Marcus arranged something special. He contacted Admiral Richard Morrison, one of the 10 men Harrison had pulled off that mountain. Morrison, now in his early 50s and commanding respect throughout the naval special warfare community, cleared his schedule immediately. On a Tuesday morning that mirrored that fateful day 23 years earlier, Marcus wheeled Colonel Harrison into the clinic waiting room to find it transformed. Admiral Morrison stood in full dress uniform, flanked by the 9 other survivors of Operation Crimson Dawn, all of whom had traveled from across the country. Behind them stood a formation of Navy SEALs, Army Night Stalkers, and Marines, all standing at attention. The clinic staff and other veterans lined the walls, witnessing history. Morrison approached the wheelchair, his decorated uniform gleaming, and dropped to one knee to look Harrison in the eye. "Colonel," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "we never forgot. Not for a single day. Every mission, every flight, every impossible situation, we carry Foxtrot One with us. You taught us that impossible is just a word, that brothers come first, always. Sir, we wanted you to know that you're not alone, that your legacy lives on in every operation we fly, every warrior we bring home." Behind Morrison, the 9 other survivors stepped forward, each placing a hand on Harrison's shoulder, a physical connection to the moment that had bound them together decades ago. Harrison, tears streaming down, his weathered face, looked at each of them, seeing the young warriors he'd pulled from death transformed into seasoned leaders, fathers, and mentors. "I crashed the bird," he said, the old guilt finally surfacing. "I got you out, but I crashed her." Morrison shook his head firmly. "Sir, you flew the impossible, held steady under fire with a dead co-pilot and a broken bird, gave us life and brought us home. The aircraft did exactly what it was supposed to do. It saved its crew and its passengers. That's not a crash, that's a successful mission." The clinic erupted in applause, not polite but thunderous, the sound of recognition finally given, of respect finally expressed. Marcus stood back, watching as Foxtrot One received the acknowledgement he'd deserved for decades. This wasn't about medals or ceremonies, though those would come later. This was about connection, about the unbreakable bonds between warriors, about ensuring that no hero fades into forgotten silence. From that day forward, Colonel James Harrison's life changed completely. He became a regular speaker at special operations training courses, sharing not just his famous mission but the hundreds of others that had shaped his career. He mentored young pilots and operators, teaching them about leadership, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Marcus remained his closest friend, the young SEAL who'd asked a simple question and unlocked a legend. They met weekly, sometimes at the clinic, more often at Harrison's home, which was no longer empty but filled with visitors, with laughter, with purpose. The colonel taught Marcus about parenthood, about marriage, about building a life beyond the uniform. Marcus taught Harrison about new tactics, new technology, about how the lessons of the past shaped the victories of the present. Their friendship became a bridge between generations, proof that true warriors never stop serving, never stop teaching, never stop mattering. On Harrison's desk sat a photograph from that day in the clinic. 10 survivors surrounding a wheelchair, hands on shoulders, connected across time and sacrifice. Next to it, a model Chinook helicopter, Callsign Foxtrot One painted on its side, a gift from the 160th SOAR. This story reminds us that heroes walk among us, often unrecognized, sitting quietly in clinics and coffee shops and park benches, carrying stories that shaped our world. It teaches us to look beyond appearances, to understand that the elderly veteran in the wheelchair might be the reason you came home from your last deployment, might be the legend whose example saved your life without you ever knowing his name. Colonel James Harrison, Foxtrot One, spent years believing his sacrifice had been forgotten, that his pain had no purpose, that he'd faded into irrelevance. But one young SEAL's curiosity and respect changed everything, proving that recognition and connection can transform lives at any age. The bond between warriors transcends time, rank, and circumstance. It's built on shared sacrifice, mutual respect, and the understanding that everyone who served carries pieces of a larger story. When we take the time to ask, to listen, to honor those who came before us, we don't just give them recognition, we give them purpose. We tell them their pain mattered, their courage counted, their example lives on. Marcus Chen learned that sometimes the most important mission isn't overseas, but right in front of you, sitting quietly in a clinic, waiting for someone to ask the right question. He learned that true leadership means bridging generations, that wisdom flows from those who've paid the price, and that a simple conversation can change 2 lives forever. Subscribe to my channel if you believe our veterans deserve recognition, respect, and the knowledge that they're never forgotten, that their call signs echo through time, that heroes like Foxtrot One continue to inspire long after their flying days end.